Do you know if it is legal in Scotland to buy or sell sex? Well, a lone sex worker working from home is currently operating within the law. However, 2 or more sex workers sharing a space for safety are breaking the law. This directly increases the vulnerability of sex workers and the risk of violence and theft.
Because you can't work with someone else, you're forced to work alone, and that is much more dangerous because clients know that.
They basically have to choose between safety or criminalization. So if they work together, if 2 sex workers work together, which is often the case, 2 or 3 sex workers work together, then they are at risk of being arrested and charged with brothel keeping. So some sex workers will decide that they will take this risk and then can face arrest and jail, and other sex workers will decide that they don't want to take this risk and will work alone, where they are much higher risk of violence, sexual violence from people posing as clients, from criminals.
A couple of friends of mine were working together, for safety, and a man turned up and turned nasty and was threatening to rob them. And so because there were 2 of them there, they were able to throw him out. But as he was being thrown out, he was saying, "I'll call the police, I'll tell them what this place is." So he knew that he could use the brothel keeping law against them. So actually the law is used by violent men to perpetrate violence against sex workers rather than protecting sex workers.
Currently, in Scotland, it is illegal for a sex worker to contribute to household finances using earnings attained through the legal sale of sex. Their spouse, flatmates, or even their child, if over the age of 18, could face prosecution and imprisonment. Are these laws really fit for purpose?
The laws on controlling are certainly not used to protect sex workers from exploitation, if that was ever their aim. What they're mostly used for is to criminalise anybody that sex workers associate with. So it can be your son even. Supporting your son if they're over 18 means that they can actually be convicted of controlling.
This law isn't prosecuted that often, so I think its impact is more in terms of what it says about sex workers. It's very much about saying, it sends a message to our society that sex workers are other, that sex workers don't have family relationships, that sex workers don't have housemates, that sex workers are somehow totally different.
It is a criminal offence in Scotland to loiter in a public place for the purposes of prostitution. This limits the amount of time that street-based sex workers have to access safety and to identify risk. Criminalisation of soliciting and curb crawling has been shown to lead to increased levels of violence.
On the street, sex workers end up running from the police. They have very little time to negotiate with clients, even to see if there's somebody else in the car, to be able to smell if the man has been drinking. The safety networks that sex workers work very hard to construct are completely dismantled every single time there's a police crackdown.
Research tells us that around 80% of street sex workers have been violently attacked in the course of their work. And most of those on numerous occasions.
The current laws prevent sex workers in a real and direct way from adopting safe working practices. The Prostitution Law Reform Scotland Bill proposes change to create a safer working environment for sex workers. But why is decriminalising the right choice?
If you look at the literature, it tends to show that legal structures have very little impact on the numbers of people working in the sex industry. This is for obvious reasons, that sex work is an economic activity. So it's economics and it's people's financial situation that shapes how many people are working in the sex industry and the conditions in which they do it.
Criminalising will not eradicate prostitution. It will force more sex workers into the dark to work in unsafe conditions with no rights. The Prostitution Law Reform Scotland Bill is based on legislation adopted by New Zealand in 2003.
In New Zealand, we look at violence and we look at legislation and we say, look, if you decriminalise sex work, you're going to support sex workers in terms of their occupational safety and health, and that translates into supporting them to be able to say no to clients more readily if that's what they want. And we've got evidence to show that since decriminalisation, more sex workers feel more able to turn down clients or, pretend clients, people who probably have no intention of being proper clients. They're supported under decriminalisation to say no to those sorts of people.
We need to free sex workers from criminalisation, from stigma.
Offenders target sex workers because they think they'll get away with it. And if these offenders are being reported to the police, and the police are taking it seriously, then more and more offenders will be apprehended, which means less of those offenders will be out there targeting sex workers and all of us.
If any other industry in the UK had nearly half of its workforce feeling unsafe, the government would surely take action immediately. So this is why it's a priority for us. The current criminalisation of sex work turns an industry that some students rely on into an unpredictable and unsafe industry.
Fundamentally, it's about sex workers' rights, but it's about time we started realising that it's about human rights.